right. So last week, guys, or last pod or a pod recently, we talked about when to hire an associate. And I think as Dwight and I were just kind of with our mastermind, the conversation always comes up like, when do I expand? Like, how do I know it's the right time to expand? And I think that's important. Obviously the associate is when to hire or how to hire. The associate is an integral part of the expansion, but that's an operational thing, right? So we have to look at and I think what we were talking about earlier today was an infrastructure thing, right? When do you know it's okay to take the leap to a bigger building, an acquisition, whatever it may be, right? How do I expand my footprint? Dwight, any comments on this as we kind of get some context?
Yeah, I just think that sometimes, especially when dentists are talking to each other, whether they're in a mastermind, whether they're, out at a conference or whatever, they sit around and they hear what other people have done, and it either triggers like, those guys are crazy or that gal is crazy, or it triggers oh, what should I be doing to compete in a moving market, compete in a consolidating industry? Because if you're not competing, in many ways, you're dying. But most people are comfortable, but the truth is you need to understand like what allows that next step to happen. The problem is our industry is packed with doctors who tend to be craftsmen, not necessarily businessmen. So the conversation, it's not a problem that makes them good at their craft, but they love to have a lot of data that helps them make the decision that helps us move forward to say, oh, it's time for me to build my building. It's time for me to expand new chairs. It's time for me to go down that road. And so I think that's really kind of where the crux of it is. And I think we can talk about both sides. The first side being like, what do we calculate? What, KPI might we use, like a utilization rate or something to that degree that helps us understand how utilized is our existing current practice. And then we can also talk about the kind of the framework of an entrepreneur and the impact of that.
Trey.
I think the first thing that came to mind is what Dwight always talks about is utilization capacity. So you talk about a KPI that really fleshes out, are you ready or not? Because that goes back to a very basic tenet of thinking of the next dollar in the same location you are is always the most valuable one, as opposed to expansion into, say, another location. So efficiencies, utilization capacity, those types of KPIs 100%. Are going to really jump out in this conversation.
So, what I always kind of try to remind people is that intuition is great. Gut feelings are good, but develop a thesis on what you want to do and then insulate or counterprove that thesis by data, right? Meaning that don't make data driven decisions, not gut decisions. And gut decisions are great at a point when you have enough chops to say like, look, experience. You know what, I've hit exactly. Maybe experience is what I'm looking for. Thank you, Dwight. But Dwight, I don't know which one of you said, I think it was Dwight, basically saying that you see a lot of craftsmen in the business of dentistry, right? Yeah. Or in the industry of dentistry. And how many of you guys hear people being like, well, I'm a perfectionist, therefore that's who I am and that's where I am and I don't want to move forward, kind of thing. And I saw an interesting quote lately. Maybe it was on Twitter because my wife says I spend way too much time there. So I'm sure I saw it there. And it was, perfection is the price you pay for minimal progress.
Uh-huh.
Yep. Right. And so I love it that people, strive for perfection, but nothing's ever perfect, as we know. So, you have to, as an entrepreneur or someone who's going along, you can't wait. I think we talked about that in the mastermind, Dwight, like not even from a data perspective, not everything is always going to line up. It says, okay, the data's here, my team here, I got the right associates, I have the financing in place, I paid it's never going to be a full, all systems go.
Correct.
Right. So,
yeah. And let me flush out a little bit of that concept of the craftsman. The craftsman concept is the understanding that they're driven by excellence, data, and a level of perfection, meaning I understand I'm in the practice of dentistry, but the goal is that over time I can perfect it better and better and better. Yet they're trying to talk about an avenue that has a lot more variables to it, which is business of dentistry, right? Business of dentistry has so many more variables, not only from who you are as a provider, but also from the team's ability, right? We were talking about with one individual on the mastermind and saying, like, you have to understand that if you go from 6 chairs to 20 chairs, it's usually a completely different team, completely different set of hygienists, completely different office manager, completely, like, the variables are totally different. And how does your community react to that size of an environment? So it's multifactorial, and it's not as delineated.
Wait, what do you
as
mean?
an
How's
equation.
your community going to act?
How does it react to the
Your
fact
team?
that your team react to the idea of, well, are we now corporate because we have to have systems and protocols? Of course you do. I mean, my largest office has 40 people in it. If you didn't have systems and protocols, like, it would be an absolute zoo, right? Because you're adding complexity. The number one complexity you add in that size of office is the number of human beings that are interacting every day, not just patients, but team. And so it's all those things that we have to be thinking about.
So let's go back to Trey. You had said one of the most important metrics that you probably would look at is a utilization rate, right? If you're looking at a building, another building, like the example Dwight gave, like this dentist was thinking, hey, I want to go from 6 to 9 to 28, right? In those kind of leaps. And right now he's got a great utilization rate, right? Really healthy. He actually has put in the time. He's got the chops to do it. His marketing is on point. He's learned, he's put in the time, right? He's really just, he's
a great implementer.
Great implementer. Right. And so I'm like, Trey, I put that aside and I said, okay, that's kind of a check for you. And every situation is different. I know you weren't there, so I'm giving you a play by play. I said, but let's look at this. I was like, what do you spend? And he's like, what? I was like, what does your family burn? Like, what do you need to survive? Right. Or not make anyone be punished, but like, what's your spend? And it was a pretty low number. Then I said, okay, what's your practice revenues? Gave me that number. Right. And I was like, so look at it's a practice that's doing over $2.8 million, I think. Right, Dwight?
Yeah.
And so I was like, the delta between the profits, which I know you're going to have because I have exposure there, and your personal burn, you have a tremendous amount of unused cash flow that is not being deployed. So you have enough bandwidth, right? If shit hits the fan or high interest rates or whatever, like, you can go a little bit wrong in your decision because you have the bandwidth to cover it up, right? You don't have this, you're not burning $60,000 or $100,000 a month like some families I know, right? You have a $10,000 a month and you're making, a tremendous 7-figure salary in your business. So you have a tremendous amount of bandwidth to work with. But that is a consideration, right? You don't want to live so close to the edge when you're making these big moves that if you're, quote unquote, from a contingent standpoint, if you're wrong, it could be catastrophic for those who depend on you, right?
Yeah.
So that is one thing I would always look at if I was making a move is do you guys know what Monte Carlo scenario is, essentially?
Yes.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know or listening, basically Monte Carlo is really just a simulator, and it runs, I think it's from roulette, right, Trey? Or something like that?
Right.
Or poker?
I don't know the origin.
Well, okay. Anyway, it's a computer model that runs a million different scenarios or a lot of different scenarios. And so that's just an exaggeration of saying, like, expect the unexpected kind of in these things. If this happens, then what will I do? If this happens, then what will I do? Right? Hope for the best and plan for kind of the worst. And so we gave Dwight and I gave some more, some things from a contingency standpoint. Trey, the other thing that was interesting to talk about that we spoke about was everyone seems to have this craving for linear and consistent life and work balance in these processes. And my contention was, and Dwight, you give me some feedback on this. I said, if nothing changes, then nothing changes, right? Meaning that you can't expect to, you have this hopium of like, one day I want to extricate myself from dentistry potentially, or work 3 days a week, or do this, or run my real estate. But you never make the changes in your inputs to affect those outputs, right? And so it just becomes like this hopium, and it just feels good to like say it out loud as confirmation, being like, oh, wow, that's cool, right? And that's like a little dopamine hit just to hear people say it's cool. But like what I said to them is like, don't expect there to be this linear exchange of like life and balance and work, and it's all going to be proportional to how you grow and everything's going to be balanced. There are going to be times in this growth where you're going to try to go to the next plateau of your life, whatever that looks like. If that's a finance thing, if that's a scale thing, if that's an impact thing, whatever it looks like. But to go to the next plateau, it's going to take probably an unbalanced or an asymmetric return on your time. Right. So you're going to probably go from, if you're trying to expand, for this example, you wanted to build this giant ass building. I said, look, you need to have a conversation with your wife and maybe your kids and say, look, maybe not your kids, they can't understand that, but your wife saying, look, the next 2 years are probably going to suck. And I'm going to be probably less available and I'm going to probably be a little bit detached, but it's a short-term sacrifice and a long-term gain. After this, I'm going to build the infrastructure for us to have abundant free time potentially.
Yeah.
Right.
I've never built anything that worked in a level of perfect life balance. That's just the way it is. And what I explained to the group was also the sense of like, you know, I had an honest conversation. I actually said the same thing you said. Okay, I'm going to have a conversation with my wife. She's a big supporter of kind of what we're doing. She's a business girl, so she gets it. But at the same time, like, I then was like, it's fine. The kids are young, this and that. But I then found her having a very adamant conversation about how they were going to structure the end of their days, that when dad was still at work or still working on a building or meeting with contractors, and it was later hours when he would normally be home, like, we're going to take dinner to him. We're going to see what they're doing. We're going to go play in the dirt. We're going to do these things. Why? Because she felt she wanted everybody to realize it's on par, because the family also has to see the progress, or
that's
else
alignment
it's
of your
this
family,
never-ending
which
thing.
your wife is an outlier and a saint.
She is.
So
It's
just
true.
so you
I'll
know
throw that out there. I'm a lucky man. But at the same time, like, it gave a concept of saying, like, what if we all did see the progress? Because as my kids saw that the building was finishing, right, they were like, oh, awesome. Hey, when are we going to book that trip to blah, 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 blah? And so it was a proactive, interactive model. And I like that, right?
This myth, though, that we perpetuate, this life work balance thing, is just, I get so tired of it. And look, I think you should be aware of it and it should be a goal. But I can't tell you in my 20 plus years of being an entrepreneur that I've ever had real balance. Sometimes I'm way over the top family and friend and vacation. And other times I get called a workaholic. You know,
that pendulum swings.
The pendulum swings, and like, that's okay. Like, don't let that be another additional strain in your life. Just acknowledge it, know that it's not forever, and know that there's a higher purpose for this potentially. Because the last thing you need when you're going to make these draconian moves is additional strain on yourself, kind of thing, you know?
That one way I've always viewed that is balance doesn't exist. So, and I've always viewed it as life work integration. So I like what I do. I involve my family in what I do in whatever capacity. For example, Dwight's wife coming in saying, hey, let's bring the kids, let's play in the dirt. Let's have them see what we're doing. Or when you start thinking of draconian moves, which draconian that's extensive. That's not making a 7-figure salary and living off 10,000 and then expanding the building. Draconian would be making a 6-figure salary, small one, living off 20,000 a month and then expanding the building. But I have never made, to Dwight's comment earlier, he's never really just moved forward in that. There's always some sacrifice. There's always some big thinking involved. And one of the big things I work on now with myself, which I've done in the past inadvertently, now I'm doing it intentionally, is that's all linear thinking. And when you make big moves forward in whatever capacity that you're doing, growth, change in lifestyle, do this to free something else later, that's exponential thinking. That's a whole different mindset. It's a whole different lens and paradigm to look through and apply. And that's where real growth, big growth, which can be draconian at that point in time, happens. And there's always a sacrifice and there's always a focus, and the pendulum is going to push into a different direction that you may not have wanted it to. But if you enjoy the journey as you do it, awesome. And there's always the bet. You always have to make a little bit of that asymmetric bet. You always have to hedge the downside, but there's risk. So now it's risk tolerance involved as well.
And that's another thing. Like, this person specifically is, I think, his 3rd year in the mastermind, Dwight, when you say, and so like, that's why, and he's gone through this. So he knows the pathway. He knows like all the steps. He knows how to reverse engineer. I'm having a problem here. Look back at this kind of thing. Like he's put in the work. And so I was like, you know what? Versus like someone who just feels vulnerable potentially at expansion, right? I think sometimes we get freaked out about expanding because we haven't put in the time potentially to say, what if this happens? Or I don't know how to fix that. So that's really not what I was talking about. I wanted to bring up. What I did want to say is, Dwight, did you mention in the text later how we were speaking about student loans?
Yeah.
He was like, well, I do have I do have a lot of, between my wife and I, a tremendous amount of student loans. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, like, so Trey, what do you?
We love.
Here we
know
go.
where this is
The fish, fishing.
Yeah. I'm biting. Go on.
No. So what do you say on before, let's just say hypothetically, before making this big move, super cool to keep your $800,000 of student loans or no?
It depends on the cash flow. It depends on the cash flow index of the loan. It depends on what you're going to create.
It depends on the interest rate. I would agree with you on that. Yes.
And even, I wouldn't even say it's on the interest rate. It's on the dollar amount of cash going out the door, because regardless of the interest rate, for example, I'll say, the practice that I just sold, I get a lump sum of money that goes into, different things. I pay some loans that make sense. I take a bulk of payment. I put it into, it's my liquidity that I'm not going to put anywhere other than, say, a high yield savings account. If I sit this in there and I put it in at 4 or 5% or whatever you have, and it's available to me at all given times, and then I think, well, maybe I should pay a couple of these other loans just for shits and giggles. They're relatively small, not a big deal. But the arbitrage on that money sitting in that account is going to pay 70% of the loan anyway, or whatever. Then it doesn't matter what the interest rate is or anything else. It's strictly a matter of the cash, the amount of cash moving out the door. I win by not paying the loan. So that's a math game, as opposed, and there's also a peace of mind to it. So I'll acknowledge that. But if you're comfortable with debt, you can play arbitrage all day long and just make sure you get more debt.
Yeah. Okay. You know what? I agree with a lot of that.
Different types of debt, though.
Yeah. Are you familiar,
You
Trey?
secretly agree with all of it.
Are you familiar with
it's right.
something called a cash flow index?
I am. I track that on all my
You
loans.
do. So do I. I mean, I run it on my net worth sheet. I do too, because it's a good.
So do I.
It's a good way of identifying which loans potentially are the most abusive to your cash flow.
Correct.
So you brought up cash flow many times in the last part you just said. And so I think this is a great strategy, as opposed to just peppering some and a lot of like, oh, I have some over here, and just like spray and pray and put some over here. I think it's a great thing. I think that's really the only thing that Dave Ramsey is wise at, is I think he kind of identifies like, find the rates, find the loans to pay down the quickest, like focus on one and pay it off in totality because of the CFI or the cash flow index, versus like just peppering some here and there. So anyway, to find cash flow index, you take your loan balance and you divide it by your minimum payment. And I think when the higher the number, the more efficient the loan, meaning the better the loan is for you to have. A lower number under 50 means it's a very inefficient loan. So that's a cool thing. It's funny you track that as well. Dwight, have you ever used that?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. My business office tracks each one, and they have them on a spreadsheet that goes based off of that.
That's cool. That's cool. That's cool.
It makes a big difference just to be able to, because if not, it's almost like, again, we tend to look at the details of it or have an emotional attachment. Well, that's a CT, gives me this much value, and it's this, all that garbage, when that just is like one rubric to keep it to say, well, that pays off a whole practice.
Yeah.
That pays off this. Different loans. It doesn't matter what it is, but having an index that helps you.
And
keep
it's
that in line.
gamifying it, right? I think it makes it a little bit more strategic and game and fun, and then you can see more progress quicker. And I think that's the momentum. I did a pod forever ago. I think it was solo when forget when it was. This is 2-3 years ago, but it was on basically the methodologies of debt repayment. Like one's an avalanche, one's a CFI, all these things. But anyway, so where are we? We were on the, so I guess this pod is, how do I know when it's time to expand? And I think, Trey, like you said, looking at a metric. I agree. I think the utilization is a great one to look at. And that's why I'm just a big fan. I'm not saying the Bulletproof KPIs are perfect or totally comprehensive at all stages of growth. But when you can commit to a bulk of some, you really have a good barometer on the health of things. And so utilization is one of the 5 kind of KPIs, thanks to Dwight. Another one that I love to look at is an APPV. And obviously we know some of the other ones, but it covers just a wide 30,000 foot view of how am I doing? And I personally would be comfortable. The other question I asked too, Dwight, remember when I asked this was, where is the goal, right? Is your goal to do less dentistry, right? Extract yourself from doing dentistry 5 days a week or whatever you're doing? Or is it to get into a model where real estate is the byproduct of your expansion and you're owning some real estate, right? Do you want to get in the McDonald's model of dentistry and really have real estate be the accelerator to your net worth?
Right.
And these are good questions to ask, right? Because so many times, and this is why the vision aspect is so important for when we have asked new masterminders matriculate, because it seems to always change, and we get these cut and paste visions about like, well, I want 3 locations. Well, why? And ultimately, it's like, well, that's what someone told me private equity wants. You're like, that's not what you. It's not very compelling. Why? When the bullets hit you, that's not a very compelling pull. So, yeah, I don't know. Do you guys have any follow ups on kind of knowing when it's okay to expand?
Yeah, I think that there's a good discussion on the fact of utilization rate, which I know a lot of the listeners have heard this multiple times, but having a total amount of production divided by the total amount of chairs multiplied by the total number of hours. So that's to give you a full understanding. It's not uncommon for me to look at practices I want to buy. I'm going to do the full gambit that are somewhere between like 125, 150, never over 175, because I know there's a lot of juice still to squeeze, meaning I can implement my protocols and get a larger arbitrage implementing my systems and processes to get that more production out of that. That also means that office doesn't need to be expanded at all, right?
Yeah.
Usually I go in there and they say, we need more room, blah, blah, blah. And they've got, 9 chairs and their utilization rate is in the 130s. And I'm like, no, you need template scheduling and structures and formats and protocols, right? So that's one side.
This is where you have, I know you mentioned the word arbitrage, but this is an intellectual arbitrage, meaning that that there's a lot of meat left on the bone, but you don't have to pay for that meat.
Correct.
Right?
Because I'll be able to get it.
Well, because you have the data
right?
points that say, look, the blended average of my utilization rate across all of my locations, across all of the things that I touch is 225. So I know that I'm going to get it up to at least the average. So the delta between what I buy and what I know that I will pretty much do, that's the bare ass minimum. So I'm paying for it at X. I know that my efficiencies are going to bring it up to Y. And right there's a big delta.
Yeah. Agreed.
Let me jump in and say this. Go ahead. Because as I'm listening, where this is going, which I think there's a deviation here that we want to grab and pull back. Now you're starting to talk about why you're going to buy the practice. Yeah. And that's a different conversation of, is this good? And then how are we going to apply our models and our metrics and our average blended version of whatever KPI onto it? Back up to, where are you now that makes you go look at that practice? And I think one thing that is interesting, and we've vaguely touched on this, but it'd be good to do right now, is we all talk about utilization capacity in our own way, shape, and form. We all use it in a different way, but you want to define it. And I think that would be especially beneficial because each of us grows in a different way and we all grow chasing different things, but all of us has most likely a very defined utilization capacity that you are chasing. So that being said, I'd say let's go and talk about what our utilization capacity. Dwight, what's yours? Like what is it? What is your number, and how do you define utilization capacity?
I'm giggling because I quizzed him blindly, and I put my number in that I was like, here's my Goldilocks number, Trey, and I put it in the chat, and I was like, don't look at the chat. And then I
Right.
asked for his. So keep going, Dwight.
So Goldilocks number for me is defined as a number that's the lower end is where, hey, I'm comfortable. The practice is really doing well and solid. And then the top end of that would be, hey, I'm concerned because we're running out of room and we're fully utilizing the space in a way that we're going to need to expand or do something to it. My numbers for that were basically, just to make them round and easy, were like 200 and 250 for utilization rate. The happy middle
slow down.
somewhere
So
in there
you're saying 200, but 250 was just kind of hair on fire max kind of thing.
was,
Okay.
you're
So
burning
Goldilocks
people
is
out.
250.
No. Goldilocks. No, hair on
Goldilocks is
fire
going to be more like 225, right in the
Okay.
middle, right? For me, is right in the middle of those two extremes. Until we're over 200, we're putting a lot of resources on that office. We're blowing and going, right? When we get it above
and
200, it's able to reallocate resources, which is also how I allocate, decide whether we
great
can
point.
allocate. Yeah.
So, but good numbers, 200, 225, 250 as a, let's say, green, yellow, red, or, Goldilocks, cold,
Yeah.
hot, whatever. How do you define it? Say how you define your utilization capacity again.
Total number of production divided by the total hours of used chairs. So that would be chairs multiplied by their total number of hours in which the office is open.
So you can define
That
it,
makes
Trey, with any tranche of time you want, a week, a month,
and
a year.
that's my point is each one of us is going to have a number. We all might define it differently. So we want to make sure that how we define it is clear and then give our numbers.
Yeah.
So everyone knows.
I think we speak universally on a monthly. I think personally, Dwight, that is a running 30-day average kind of thing, right?
Per month.
Yes.
Per
month per location.
All right, Pete, what are your numbers?
Yeah.
Including all chairs. This was the confusion earlier in the mastermind where they were segregating hygiene from doctors and all that.
If you have 4 chairs, if you have 10 chairs and you're open 4 days a week and you work 8 hours, you now have 320 chair hours as your denominator, your denominator.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. You need to take out holidays. You need to get an accurate number on your hours. But yes, I'm pretty obsessive about that. But that's the reality of it. And it is tracked every month by my team. And we look at it per location. Yeah.
Okay, where are you going, Trey?
Pete, do you define it the same way?
Yeah, 100%.
Or do you track it and define it for you the same way? And then what are your numbers?
Well, going back to my example of putting it in the chat. So my number I put in was 220. That's from a Goldilocks number. Anything above 200, I'm comfortable in an expansion. I will tell you, because going back to the why, like I like McDonald's model, right? I like the real estate that justify the owner occupied real estate. And I really get fulfilled by design and concept. I always said I would have been an architect if I hadn't been a dentist. I really get lit up by the problem solving and creativity around new facilities.
Awesome. So question for you, Dwight, on that. Are you ready to expand if you're over 200?
Interesting.
I'm ready to reallocate resources towards a potential acquisition when an office is over 200, meaning I don't
answer.
Yeah, the answer is yes, but great politician.
I don't know how else you want me to explain that. Like if
I'm just saying Pete defined that as when he's ready to expand. You went into detail of it, so it's concise and clear. So y'all are very pushing the same number. I've actually never done the hours. I'm way broader because I don't want to dive deep into the weeds that much. So my utilization capacity is nothing more than production per op per year, and I don't get any more granular than that. So,
but Trey,
scale, it'll probably work out to somewhere similar to yours, I'm guessing.
Though. Let me tell you why. Let me tell you why.
It's
because what you're looking at is a big lag indication of how it did, right? We're tracking it over a smaller tranche of time, which then gives trend lines to say how the practice potentially is doing, so that you don't have to look back and be like, well, how did we do for the year? Oh, let's do better next year.
So I track it monthly because
then you're
my
doing the
big
same
numbers
thing.
are always trailing 12. Right.
Okay.
So my point is that's how I define it, and I'm looking at it. So my number will matter. I'm looking at 300,000 as the baseline. If I hit 300,000 per op over the last 12 months, I'm ready to move into the next game.
The interesting thing
I go
that we
up
see,
and try to hit 375 on the high number, but at 300, I'm already looking for the next location. I'm not trying to squeeze that more.
So you bring up
before I move
something
on.
interesting that I'm going to kind of morph into another tributary of this. Is that what I've noticed with people is that they wait until a lot of the data aligns where their hair is on fire, they're busting at the seams, and they're like, you know what? It's time for a new facility. And guess how long that takes? Long is the only answer I can tell you. Long.
Yeah, not
short. Right? The whole I'm going to get me an associate and I'm going to build a new facility. We're talking 24 months minimum, pretty much, if you're going to do a ground up. So I'm always a big fan. That's why I think the data is your best friend, because if you start identifying these trends and saying, look at where we're going, I'm deploying X and look at what's happening, that you start identifying trend lines saying, shit, if this keeps going the way it is, you guys, in the next 12 months, we are going to have capacity problems. So maybe now's the time I get on Crexy and start looking at location number one or relocation, right? It's this proactive methodology. I think that's where data really helps justify, right, your gut decision.
Yeah. Well, and that's a big reason why, and I don't think that's much of a tributary. That's exactly what we're talking about. Each one of us just defined that, and each one of us had a threshold of which there was a baseline. At this level, I'm looking to expand or allocate resources elsewhere. And when you start looking at that, that has a built-in, because that was our bottom of, say, 3 numbers. That's built into we're looking before we're maxing out, squeezing every drop of juice out of that practice. Because you're going up from there. Your efficiency is continuing. It's going to continue to build. But if you start elsewhere, say a ground up, and you have a 24-month lead time on doing it, you're still building your utilization capacity in that last practice or blend or however you're going to track it. You're ready to go when it's appropriate, to where you have nothing left. There's nothing left to squeeze out of that facility or that team or whatever you're using it for. And you're ramped up and ready. So it's not oh shit, I'm completely packed. Now let's go look for land, find the contractor, design the building, and go through another 24 months while you're just stuck waiting. So there's runway. So you're looking before the runway's end.
Whenever you think you're going too big or too fast or too aggressive, just remember this guy. You know who this is, Trey?
So good. Yeah.
No, hold on. Let me open that up more. I got you on little. Oh, okay. Yes, I do. On the side of the highway.
The side of the highway.
How many?
Oh, look,
how many
this is a picture of the old office, actually.
Yeah, exactly.
You tour the facility virtually, and
it takes you about an hour and a half to tour it virtually.
You start coming up with ideas, thinking, "Man, I don't have."
So I love this, and we actually brought this up on this call, on our call, but just this was a move that many people were like, I remember when this guy, Innovative Dental out of Springfield, I forget what his name is. He has a pretty popular YouTube channel, but anyway, I forget his name. I think I've texted him a few times, but apologize if you're listening. But you got to just acknowledge this for a second, that a ton of work went into this. I can assure you this was not, hey, we're ready to expand. Let's go build this. Like, this was a 5-year plan in the progress, right? Of just, and Dwight, I think you told me that he went from how big to how big kind of thing? 9 operatories to this absolute behemoth of an office. Like, if you ever want to feel bad about what you've created, or you think that you're a big deal of what you've done in dentistry, go do that office tour. It's like, all I could think about, I just shamed myself the whole time. I was like, you're so small. You're such a small thinker, Peter. Why would you just shame?
And he wanted to make himself a single box. And I think we all are aware also that there's another 50 plus operatory office that's about to be built in South Florida. And, there's a lot of things that are going on.
But Trey, look what happened after this. I don't know if you can still see my screen. Yeah.
He got off.
So he's now been,
because there's capacity.
Right. So now private equity came in.
Room to grow.
Was it a huge risk? I don't know. Probably. Right. but I'm sure I'm sure that risk was validated by how are we doing? What got us here isn't going to get us there. Meaning that I said this on the mastermind, the skill set that you have for 6 to 9 ops is not the same in any capacity as what is required of this.
I agree.
Right.
Yeah.
And so like, if you don't, if nothing changes, nothing changes. And so,
right.
This is where you have to level up and get into groups that are going to show you the way of like ask questions and watch podcasts and look at YouTube and get in masterminds and like, learn the next level of skill set, because even your skills, Trey, you said are linear as a myth. Even your skill learning is not linear, right? It's you almost have to extricate sometimes. Let me tell you something. I bet you this guy, Dr. Grant, I bet you Dr. Grant lost a lot of friends in this process. Lost a lot of dental friends in this process. People he probably hung out with or went to school with, right?
Yep.
Because, we don't like it when people
do grandiosities,
right? Because what does that do? It rubs your nose in the fact that you're probably you don't have that same gumption or grit or whatever. And that's okay, but it doesn't feel good. Therefore you try to, there's people that unfortunately, how do you build the biggest building in town? You tear down everyone else and you build a one story thing kind of thing. So anyway, I don't know. I've spent more time on this innovative example today than I've spent in the past 5 years. But I got to say, it's pretty inspiring, man. It's pretty inspiring. And
it is.
And it could have gone badly, like let's just say, and I think this was built in the COVID time. I mean, there's probably so many things that could have gone badly in this. So anyway, not to.
My bet is someone of that capacity. My bet is if he's on this podcast talking to the three of us, he has the same numbers, the same philosophy, and he knows.
But look. I mean,
as Dwight said,
look, here we go. He made this giant expansion of a building facility. So this leaps into our conversation. When should I expand? He made this huge risk. I mean, what would you guess, Dwight, the construction of that land and in totality was?
Oh shit.
8+ million.
Shit. I bet we're at 12. Easy. All day long. You're
in Illinois.
Well, okay. All right. Let's just say 8 to 12.
Yeah. Stone's thrown. Shots fired.
No, not Illinois. You're not in Illinois. You're in Springfield, Missouri.
Oh, Missouri, even cheaper. Okay, sounds good.
Hey, but you know what? Do you guys know about this? I do. I will say, I just said that I spend little time on this, but I will tell you, I use this little hack from time to time just to be funny, just to be interesting. So look at this. Let me go back to this page. So do you know that Google, because Google and iPhones have all that tracking that they do, it lets you know when a business is busy or not. You see this little thing. So go to their Google profile, scroll down, and this is a live counter because it's pinging cell phones with that data.
Best time to call them is going to be at 1 p.m. in the afternoon.
So what, Dwight?
Best time to call them is 1 p.m. in the afternoon.
Yeah, because it tapers off. Yeah, so mornings are hot. But anyway, this is a funny thing to do with even your competition. Not saying I've ever done that, but
for sure.
For sure. Maybe
you have. He just figured this out.
No, I figured this out a long time ago because I used to use it, Trey, like when I was taking my kids' places, hey, I don't want to go to that bouncy house place or whatever it was and being like sit in line and have a bunch of kids there. I'd wait till the bouncy house had no one there and take my kids kind of thing. So I used this little hack.
Yeah. You're shaking your kids up.
Yeah,
like, nap.
Get up.
We're going to trampoline park.
It's time for trampoline park at 8 a.m. Let's go. Anyway, where was I going? I forget when I stopped with that. But Trey, you were saying something. Oh, we were talking about the cost of construction. Okay, so in that, right, this is important where you kind of know your vision and you know what you want to do, and maybe this was all part of his plan. But guess what happened? Built a giant building. The practice and the building are completely different businesses, as they should be. Never have those commingled, by the way, just stating the obvious, but someone on this pod probably has not done that. So they're different businesses. So now we have a dental practice that's was probably putting up large numbers and was being paid for, as Dwight said, future growth. Okay. big multiple probably paid on the EBITDA was there. Now you have, who was the capital partner? Modus, it said. Okay,
Yeah,
so now you have
Modus.
a private equity, Modus, that's now the tenant
Correct.
of this. It's no longer Dr. Grant. It's now the sponsor of the building. Now the person who's on the hook for the rent roll or the NOI is now Modus, which now Dr. Grant's building is now worth considerably more because the tenant is a corporate backed tenant versus him.
Correct.
Right? Because if he got hit by a bus, right? The person, if he wanted to put his building on the market, they're like, shit, that's an existential risk. Like if you get hit,
The guarantee is stronger.
yeah, the guarantee has come much stronger. Like not even a little bit. So because of that, and I know I'm getting into real estate shit, but because of that, the cap rate would come down and the building would be worth more, and not by a little bit. I would say, wouldn't you guess, Dwight, that would say, or Dwight and Trey, both you can comment on this. Wouldn't you say that probably increased the capitalization of the building by a couple $1 million? Yeah,
for sure.
Okay.
At that
so
level,
isn't this
I have
interesting?
Buildings
right?
worth nothing. That's switching to a cap rate over price per square foot.
Right.
Quintuples the
right.
value at a reasonable cap rate, not at a ridiculous.
Yeah. So this is why, like, the when should I expand has a lot of tentacles involved. Of like, well, what is important to you? Like, what is the master goal? If it's to extricate yourself more from dentistry, you probably need more capacity. If it's to be accretive to your net worth, then maybe you need to make a play like innovative dental guy here. Or is it just like life, work, balance, happiness, and just get to X? And, like, this is why that's so important. That's what I wish, and I wish we could insert Craig for that portion. It's like, Craig, tell us about the vision here, buddy.
Yeah. I also think that, like, we're kind of talking about utilization rate and talking about when to expand as a finite as opposed to an infinite game, which is where I really struggle. It's also why you called me a politician when I answered the way I answered.
You're still butthurt from that?
No, I'm not. I just want you to understand, like, I feel like you're skipping out on a whole half of it. Like, my passion is not just to add more practices. It's to increase same store sales.
I know this. You're right. And that's good for everyone to hear. You're right.
So
my apologies.
Yeah, so I think it's really, really, no, it's good. I think the concept is when you look at utilization rate, you should be looking at it at all locations if you're a multi-location owner, and understanding that bringing on a new one means your others are spinning plates at a pace where the utilization rate is high enough. Because when I know that a practice has now gone over 200, my reallocation resources is either A, there's another practice that is now down in the 180s because we had a doctor leave or we had a complication. So we need to focus on growing them, same store sales, and making sure that they're back on it before we take on another location. So that's also the flow of it. It's not a finite game in this process as well.
Fair.
That's a very, very good
So
point.
Dwight,
and I think that needs to be hammered.
Is there anything we've definitely hammered the utilization rate? And I don't want to say that's like the metric, like green go, red stop kind of thing.
No.
In this context, what else would you guys, given all the aforementioned that we said, is there anything new that you would put on the table that would be, as we wrap up this pod, that would be new and good things to audit, consider, put on the table as like data to help you analyze, right? Obviously there's demographics. Obviously there's things like even just checking Google Maps and seeing, demographics. I gave a hint the other day. I was like, go in Google Maps and look at like roofs under construction, like that kind of thing. If you're opening into a new area, I mean, there's so much we could spend another 6 hours on just like the how-tos. But is there anything just briefly that you guys can just say something else that's been imperative to your journey on this, answering this question? Should I do this or not? Should I expand or not? Should I hire an associate or not?
I'll throw one metric out there that's unique, not unique, but it's something that I pay attention to more so than many other things is your patient count. When I can leverage an existing practice, move patients into the other one. Now I'm able to choose locations based on opportunity, as opposed to I might preemptively jump on another practice or another location because I see patient count moving up at a rate that I need to move people over, and it's going to allow me to spin more plates.
I've never looked at that.
As long as I recognize that I don't want to run in and go, well, maybe I'm spinning too many plates. So there are the obfuscations to it.
Dwight, anything from you?
Our next location is specifically based on that metric. Is I can't keep expanding that Missouri City location construction wise. It just doesn't make any rational sense. So I'm starting a whole other practice with one of the doctors in that location who has a booming practice, and we're moving them into their own individual practice. That's not extremely far away, but is within a realm where you're okay with a
partial cannibalization, I'm guessing. And
absolutely,
because you actually want that is the business model is somewhat of cannibalization because interesting. I never, it's funny, guys. I in my models, and some of mine are 3 or 4 miles close to each other as the crow flies. But again, I'm in a metro area on some of mine. And so I always would look at the cannibalization and like, shit, am I going to lose? But I never stopped to consider.
That's positive.
That could be, you hear that word cannibalization, you think, ooh, terrible, bad, taking away.
Negative.
Right. And then I never stopped to consider like, maybe that's a strategy in itself. That's pretty cool.
Eventually you expand your strategy based on that enough to where you fully consume a market, which is the whole point of how you consume a market, right?
Which is the end goal in many cases. That's what I look to do in that case. So I'm looking to saturate a market, over dominate market share, and then push out. So the practice I'm buying right now is, it's 5 minutes from our first practice. And what it does is allow me to not rely on new patient flow. It allows me to just move patients over.
Yeah, we're doing the same thing. That's really interesting. Yeah. That's cool. That's a biggie.
And what you find is you aren't competing with the locations. You have symbiotic relationships of growth. It actually helps you. It doesn't hurt you. And there's a whole nother strategy of branded, same brands. Maybe you go different brands.
Because
maybe it's known,
the
maybe
same
it's
pot
not.
Kind of thing. Ultimately, the same pot.
I could put Tippit Dental Group 5 minutes away from each other. I'm going to gain benefits from that, but I can also change the brand and have 2 different brands, and I'm going to gain benefits from that. So it's just a matter of which one's going to benefit that from that specific location.
Okay, Trey, talk to me about these cabanas that everyone keeps telling me about. How many people have you hit up to hit your cabanas out?
We've hit up.
What is going on at this? So the summit, as you're hearing this, I'm doubting you're going to hear this before the summit, but if we are on the Tuesday before, we are all going there. And I have had,
he feels safe.
I have had not one, but 6 people reach out and be like, "You going to be at Trey's cabana?" Like kind of thing. I'm like, what? What is going on right now?
We have just as many people registered to the cabanas as we do as to the summit.
Trey, this is not a symbiotic relationship. As you had just said, this seems like you are cannibalizing.
This is
you are cannibalizing.
It's cannibalization, parasitic.
Yes, I'm kidding.
A long time ago, you said I can fish in your ocean. I took that literally, and I am fishing in your ocean.
Oh my gosh! Oh god! This segment is sponsored by Tippit Dental Group.
Yeah, Tippit Dental Group.
No, it's just funny. I'm excited. I was trying to wrap it on going to these hardcore numbers and this, that, and plan to
end on something.
Yeah, it's great.
We will all be at the cabanas day 2, all day 2. So don't call my name out in the middle of day 2. I won't be there. And
or like last time,
we will have, like last time.
Where's Trey? Where's Trey? Everybody.
Day 2 of most things I don't particularly care to attend. So I do something different where I can gain a lot of value, and that's usually let's go to the pool. Let's bring whoever wants to come and discuss life.
I can't believe this.
Dental growth, whatever, business of dentistry, however you want to do it.
I love it.
And we take our whole crew, and then it's expanded into everything else.
I honestly don't care though. If people are learning, I don't give a shit about the mechanism in which they do.
If I thought you cared, I certainly wouldn't do it.
Totally. I think it's cool.
No, the game though becomes it's there after the deal, it's there during the deal, and a lot of it really it all spawned from me doing that with just our team. So most of the events we go to, you go and have some learning, but most of the time you don't get opportunities like that. And if you're out there on a weekend, a lot of times I want to take my whole team that's there, isolate them for an extended period of time, not a dinner, not something else. So we plan those things, but I want an extended period of time where people can not only discuss things like this, or even if it's nothing, even if it's just everybody's hungover and just hanging out and taking naps and drinking more. I mean, even if that, people are together, and that's team building at a very high level. And some of the things I've learned is all the KPIs in the world don't make up for the fact that if you can build
hangovers together,
presence, and
if you can be hungover together, that is the kind of team bonding you want.
Yeah. Sharing Advil.
You all see the same tiger in the bathroom.
Oh my God, kill
Finnegan.
Well, the good news is it looks like we're going to be in a balmy 113 degree weather already. Which I looked at the forecast and I was like, is this 113? Anyway, guys, excited to see you in a few days. Appreciate that. This was a good conversation, and I think it just keeps building on, like you said, Trey, it builds on like the hiring of the associate one that we spoke of last time. And then it's just, it's because like Dwight, you even said this, you said, look, you're either kind of foot on the gas or foot on the brake kind of thing. And so, interest rates be damned or this be damned, like you just either go or don't go, but don't expect like, asymmetric results when you're not putting an asymmetric time to that, solving that problem,
Yeah.
Anyway.
Absolutely.
All right, guys. See you in a few days. Over and out, everybody. Thanks for listening. Guys.